Have you been wanting to learn to play the piano or keyboard by ear? Hi, I'm John Mathis Jr. and that is what we're going to talk about in today's video. I'm going to give you 5 steps or foundations that will put you on a path and help you understand more about the keyboard and how to play by ear. Before we get into those steps though, I want to encourage you that the brain or the mind needs time to absorb information and piece it together. So if you watch this video and you don't understand a lot of it or the concepts, you have to give yourself some time. You have to watch it several times. You have to take some time to follow along, go through some of the motions yourself on the keyboard, and allow yourself, your mind, your muscle memory, the chance to begin to connect the dots on this. And it will start making sense. Give yourself 4, 5, 6 weeks of reviewing these things and getting to know the keyboard and training your ear to hear these things. So without any further delay, the first step is an obvious one. We're going to get to know the keyboard and understand a little bit about these keys. Come on. Number 1, let's get to know the keyboard. The keyboard has 2 different color keys or notes, the black keys and the white keys. The white keys are the major keys or notes of the keyboard, and they are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and we're back to A. The black keys are in groups of 2 and 3. That repeats the length of the keyboard. 2, 3, 2, 3, groups of 2 and 3. This allows you to see a pattern that will help you to locate the notes. For example, the key or note of A is located here in the grouping of 3 black keys. It is this white key just before the last black key in the grouping of 3. This is A. Notice the rest of the white keys or major keys, they're also located in this pattern of grouping of 2 and 3 black keys where you can find them easily. B, it is located just after the group of 3 black keys. It's the white key here. C, it is the white key just prior to the grouping of 2 black keys. And I want to mention that anytime there are 2 black keys together on this entire keyboard, the white key just before those 2 black keys is C. D is the white key in the middle of every grouping of 2 black keys. E is the white key that comes after the grouping of 2 black keys. F, the first white key prior to the start of the grouping of the 3 black keys. F. G, the white key just after the first black key in the grouping of 3. And then we see A again, which is the white key just prior to the last of the 3 black keys in the grouping of 3. The black keys are flats and sharps. Flat is a term for when a pitch moves down. Sharp is a term for when a pitch moves up. So the black keys are named in relation to the white key beside it. And they can be known by 2 different names. Let's take a look at the grouping of 3 black keys. This black key, the first of the 3, it's located just after the F major key, and located just before the G major key. So we're moving up from the F. This is F sharp or G flat. The second black key in the grouping of 3, we're moving up from a G major, moving down from an A major. It can be called G sharp or A flat. And we won't get into the music theory of why or when to call it flat or sharp. I just want you to look and memorize the location according to the pattern and the names of the keys. The last black key in the grouping of 3, it is located in between the A major and the B major, A sharp or B flat. Then we have the grouping of 2 black keys. The first of the grouping of 2 is between the C and the D. C sharp or D flat is what that would be referred as. The other black key in the grouping of 2 is between the D and the E. It's D sharp or E flat. So don't worry about. One other thing we're going to cover is movement on the keyboard, whole steps and half steps. Anytime you move one key up or down, one note, it is a half step. Let's go back to A. So if I were to tell you to move a half step up, that's just one key. If I told you to move a half step down from A, that's one key. A lot of times beginning learners will skip black keys because, well, they're half the width and half the length. They're easy to overlook. But a half step is one key or one note up or down, regardless of whether it's black or white. If we were on, for example, C, if we were to move down a half step, the very next key is actually a white key. Half step up or down is one key. A whole step is, we'll go back to A. A whole step is 2 keys or notes up or down. So if we move a whole step up from A, there's our 1, 2 keys that put us at B. Go back to A. If we went a whole step down, which would mean we would move 2 keys, that would put us to G because we moved 2 keys. Half steps and whole steps. Those will come in handy later. So now that we understand the keyboard a little better, let's talk about number 2, step number 2 or foundation number 2. And that is understanding the major scale. The major scale is very important. It is where a lot of your basis and foundation will be in understanding of chord progressions, finding chords, making chords, all of those things. So let's look at the major scale. We're going to take a look at finding the major scale. And it's important to know how to locate a scale and important to train your ear to hear a scale because we can form chords from scales. And we can also get an idea of what a chord progression is probably going to be in a song just from knowing the scale. But there's a formula for finding the scale, and it has to do with the movement we learned, whole steps and half steps. We're going to start back to A, our A major note here, and we're going to listen to the scale. 7 notes, winding back up on our root note of A, just an octave higher. The formula for this, and this is the same no matter what major key we pick, the formula is moving up whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half. So in other words, that's a whole step is 2 keys. So A, we go 1, 2, that's our whole step, 1, 2, that's our second whole step. Now we move a half, that's just 1 key. Then we have whole, so that's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then a half step puts us back at A, an octave higher. So if you need to write that down, or I'll put this in text, from your root key, it's whole, half, whole, half. Whole, half, whole, half. That's important because it will allow you to find any scale using that formula. And as you notice, there's 7 notes in the scale, with the 8th one being back on our root note. And before we move on to the next section, I want to encourage you that if you have any questions, anything you're not sure of, Google is your friend. You can look up the major scales. So if you want to do an exercise on your own, it's if you can find the major scale in G using this formula. You can also look it up on Google and verify that you have correctly found the G scale. Google is your friend. Number 3. Let's talk about step number 3 or foundation number 3. We're going to talk about forming chords from the major scale that we just learned in step number 2. So let's form some chords. So now that we can find the scale, it's important to know scales because we form chords from scales. The major chords are formed from the first note, third note, and fifth note in the scale. So we're going to go back to A, and we're going to look at our A scale, A major scale. 7 notes with the 8th being back to our root. Let's look at the first 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. First 5 notes of the scale. You form your major chord with your first note, third note, and fifth note of the scale. So we've just discovered how to form an A major chord from the A major scale, and this applies to any scale. If you are in B, the first 5 notes of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take our first, our third, and our fifth, and we formed a B major chord. So back to our A chord, our first, third, fifth note in the scale. If you want to make a minor chord out of a major chord, you simply take your third note and move it down a half step, and we form an A minor by taking our third, moving it to a half step down. So that's how to find your chords, your major chords, and it's important. That's why it's important to know the scales so you can find chords. And we're going to learn in our next segment another important feature of scales that will help you play songs by ear. So now that we are familiar with the keyboard, now that we've reviewed the major scale, now that we've formed some chords, we're going to talk about number 4, step number 4, and that is some standard chord progressions. This will help you in playing by ear. So let's look at chord progressions. Chord progressions. We're going to return back to our A major note. We're going to talk about chord progressions. So we have our 7 notes in the scale. That's the 7 notes. Most common chord progressions use your root chord, whatever key you're in. This is 1, and we're in A. So the most common chord progressions use A. Then the 4th note in the scale becomes one of the chord progressions. The 5th note in the scale, and the 6th note as a 6th minor. So let's hear what that sounds like. If we were to play a song in the key of A, typically it may have a progression such as your A major, then your 4th note in the scale as a 4 chord. We may return to the A major. Then perhaps the 6th minor, which would be an F sharp minor. Then the 5th note in the scale is an E major chord. So that's a kind of a typical chord progression you may find in a lot of songs. The order or the transition may line up differently, but again, why it's important to learn scales, you can pretty much assume a lot of times when playing by ear that this progression will be used in some form in most songs. It's not always the case. There's one other transition chord you might see, which would be the 2, the 2nd note of the scale, as a chord, a major chord, and it usually transitions to the 5 or the 5 chord that we're making. You'll see that sometimes, but practice looking for your 1st, 4th, 5th, 6 minors and forming those chords just as we did a minute ago. So there you have it. Just one of the most commonly used chord progressions and how you can find that using your scale and how you can form the chords using your scale. Now we have arrived at step number 5. Step number 5 doesn't involve me playing or showing you anything. Step number 5 involves you. It is practice. Sounds like an obvious thing. Practice makes perfect. But there's 3 things that are going to happen when you practice this final step. When you practice, it trains your muscle memory. You have to train your muscle memory. It's going to be awkward making chords at first. It's going to be awkward changing chords. But practice will cause this to be subconscious, that you will automatically form chords after you spend the time practicing, spend the weeks practicing, making chords different. Chords have different ways of holding your hands and fingers. Sometimes you have a finger on a black key. Using your middle finger for a black key or a white key, you'd be surprised at how awkward that is at first. But practice will eliminate that by providing you muscle memory. The other aspect of practice that you will get and benefit from practicing the keyboard is it develops your ear, and you need your ear in order to play by ear. Playing by ear simply means that you can hear the chord progressions, you can hear when they change, and you can follow along. And the development of that comes from practice, from being able to hear and recognize when you're not changing at the correct time in a song or other aspects of the changes, and just being able to hear those changes. Musicians reach a level where they can sit down and listen to a song, never touch an instrument, but they can write down the chord progression to that song because they've played so much and practiced so much, they recognize these changes in the tones and the pitches. The third thing that practice is going to give you is a better ability to play in tempo. And that's very important as well. You don't want to speed up during a song. You don't want to slow down during the song. You don't want to push a song the entire time or rush it the entire time and begin to get faster and faster, or begin to get slower and slower. So the development of tempo is very important, and the development of tempo comes from practicing and playing in tempo. You can find apps that have beats per minute. The old school term would be like a metronome. You can set that and play along to a perfect tempo, which will help develop your ability to play in tempo. So practice, practice, practice. Step number 5. Okay, there you have it. 5 steps or foundations to help you to learn to play the piano by ear. So go watch this video again. Take the time to review each step, follow along where there are places where you need to put your hands on, have hands-on experience, and begin to form that muscle memory, begin to train your ear, and begin to develop the ability to play in tempo. Those things will help you. Subscribe to this channel. If you're not a subscriber, be sure and hit the bell notification so you don't miss a video. In the future, we'll be reviewing some choruses and verses of songs and showing different ways that you can play those. Since you're going to know the chords and be able to change swiftly, correctly, in tempo, you can put all that to use and learn to play some music. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for watching.